Just Energy with naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theories that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swing of a pendulum to the waves in the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. In the same way, things such as rocks and minerals vibrate very slowly and at speeds that are imperceptible to us. Living things such as plants, animals, and man vibrate faster and appear to be alive. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is if we take everything in our own universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita as she explores questions such as, what are we made of? Why do we get sick? How can I live a more balanced and whole life? Call in and talk to her and her thought-provoking guest. Send us your questions and get the help you need to move beyond any obstacle or challenges that may be affecting your life, right from the source. So stay tuned and explore your possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. Thank you all for tuning into the show today. Today we're going to be talking to Christopher Dunn about his new book, The Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. One of my favorite topics, Egypt, again. It's going to be good. I have a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll get Christopher on the line. Till the end of this month, so that would be till the end of October, my training program, my medical intuition and energy medicine training program is on sale at an unbelievable price. If you're interested in getting more information about how you, too, can become a energy medicine practitioner, certified intuitive, or medical intuition and practitioner, that doesn't even make sense, go to www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. That's appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. November 6th, don't forget, History, Haunts, and Legends Conference in spooky Jefferson, Texas. For more information about that event, go to jeffersonghostwalk.com. I'll be there. I'll be talking about 2012. It ought to be a fun time. And actually, that is a really cool time. You get to go on investigations. You do a ghost walk. You get to hang out. It's fun. And as always, if you're interested in any of the services I offer, a medical intuition evaluation, a psychic reading, getting some energy work done, or even keeping up on what's going on at soulhealer.com or with the radio show, Just Energy Radio, sign up for our newsletter. You can go and find out information about all of that at www.soulhealer.com. That's soulhealer.com. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Christopher and get him on the line. Christopher Dunn has an extensive background as a master craftsman, starting as an apprentice at an engineering company in his hometown of Manchester, England. Recruited by an American aerospace company, he immigrated to the United States in 1969. Beginning as a skilled machinist and tool maker, he has worked at almost every level of high-tech manufacturing, from building to operating high-powered industrial lasers, including the position of project engineer and laser operations manager at Danville Metal Stamping, a Midwest aerospace manufacturer. He is now a senior manager at that company. So let me get Christopher on the air, and maybe his mic will unmute. There he goes. Hey, Christopher, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you, Rita. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
How does someone who works as a machinist and manufacturing engineer, developer kind of guy get interested in something like ancient Egypt?
Well, ancient Egypt, or the pyramids and other artifacts that you find throughout Egypt, are of intense interest to many engineers. In fact, the engineers that I have traveled to Egypt with are absolutely blown away by what the ancient Egyptians accomplished. But what got me started was back in 1977, I picked up a book entitled Secrets of the Great Pyramid by Peter Tompkins. And in that book, my mind was open to different possibilities with respect to the Great Pyramid and the culture that actually built the Great Pyramid. And there were different ideas presented. There was some contrary arguments that argued against the tomb theory, which until I'd read this book, that was the only theory that I'd heard. That's what I learned in high school, and essentially, but I never thought anything of it. It's a tomb. But this book actually questioned that theory, and a lot of the people who raised questions were engineers, like David Davidson, who was a British engineer, and he questioned the tomb theory because of the way the pyramid was built, the design of the interior, almost like the schematics of a machine. And essentially, that's what I concluded after looking at the cross-section of the inner chambers of the Great Pyramid, that it had the precision of a machine, and it also had the appearance of a machine. So why do people think it's a tomb? So, and ultimately, I too dismissed the tomb theory as it didn't really stack up as far as the evidence that was found, and in fact, most of the evidence argued against it. But unfortunately, they still cling to that theory, and we're just kind of ringing the bell, saying, "Hey, you need to look a little closer at this evidence. Your theory doesn't quite fit." But it was natural for me to actually kind of lock on to this kind of research because of my background, because much of what I have seen in Egypt actually is very, very similar to what I have seen every day of my career, and that is very, very precise artifacts crafted with machine-like precision and with machine-like tool marks on them. So that was how I got started, and it's been a very fruitful area of research for me. I've learned a lot. Learned a tremendous amount of respect for the ancient Egyptians. They were incredible, incredible engineers and architects.
Before we came on air, we were chit-chatting a little bit, and I brought up about on your website, geezerpower.com, give that a little plug, there was a picture of the cross-section of the pyramid, and you had put in the notations, microwave power out, microwave signal input. And part of our conversation was that I was fascinated that you had come to that conclusion, because I had been making, even on air, commentary about thinking that the pyramid was some kind of a microwave device.
Yeah. Yeah, and really I came to the conclusion by trying to find answers for all the features within the Great Pyramid. And because of the unusual design, because of the certain features that are found there, such as the descending passage, the lower subterranean chamber, an ascending passage at 23.5 degrees, the horizontal passage with another chamber with two shafts that actually lead from it but are not quite connected to it, and the Grand Gallery, all of these features, particularly the King's Chamber too, alleged King's Chamber, which I don't describe as a chamber for a king anyway. I call it the resonant chamber. But all of these features had to have had some purpose that fit within a comprehensive theory for what the entire pyramid was about. And in the tomb theory, they talk about the king's chamber being the burial chamber, and then all the other features are essentially symbolic features that were installed for some esoteric or ideological reason. And it just didn't make sense to me because, when you go into a tomb up in the Valley of the Kings and you're going down the hallway into a burial chamber, and the walls are highly decorated, their symbology is actually carved into the walls and painted. And so to actually engage in a construction project, which many engineers definitely agree would be almost impossible to duplicate today, to actually engage in such an enterprise and put these features within it purely for symbolic reasons just doesn't make sense at all. And so, but for what reason did they do it? And as you started out this little thread, it was to actually convert energy coming up from the Earth that was responding with a pulsing vibration that was sent into the Earth through the subterranean chamber, and then the pyramid actually collected that energy, and it forced vibration in resonators that were housed in the Grand Gallery, where there are 27 pair of slots along the length of the Grand Gallery, and that became airborne sound, which ultimately drove the granite in the King's Chamber to resonance. And a lot of other things were going on too, of course. Hydrogen was being generated in the Queen's Chamber through the introduction of chemicals through the northern and southern shaft, and there's evidence in those areas to support that theory too. So all of these little bits of anomalies within this pyramid that didn't really fit into the tomb theory seem to find a place in a comprehensive theory that described the device as a machine that converted mechanical energy into microwave energy, and then transmitted that energy through the southern shaft in the King's Chamber, or the resonant chamber.
Okay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear a phone ringing. Hello? Hello?
Okay, this should fix the problem. Can you still hear me?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I can hear. This is the second time this has happened where I'm still logged in, and so it just dropped me out, and so I've actually called myself like I'm a guest on the show.
Oh, really?
Extremely weird. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties, everybody, but I'm back, and we can keep moving forward. So I hope you were entertaining the people here while I was absent.
Well, I just kept talking till I heard you say, "Can you hear me?" And then there was a phone ringing in my ear. So yeah, I kept talking, and we got I think I finished my train of thought. I didn't get into too much detail, but in the as far as the maser aspect, but there's a lot of detail in my book, The Giza Power Plant.
Right, and I'll have to have you come back on and talk about that book. I'm not sure that I was aware of it. So, but let's move on to this. Let's move on to this new book, The Lost Technology of Ancient Egypt. And one of the comments that you make in your book is that it seems like the sculptures of ancient Egypt are more a feat of engineering as opposed to a piece of art. Can you explain that?
Well, I think that's a fusion of science and spirit, essentially, where the engineer becomes the artist and is using advanced tools to actually create the art, because they're highly stylized, highly. They are beautiful statues when you look at them, and if you're just passing by, the statue of Ramses in the Luxor Museum, you would look up and admire it, and you would, they are very impressive because they're so large and crafted out of single pieces of granite. So they are very, very impressive statues. And so for the average admirer, just walking by and looking at it or taking a photograph, generally you take a photograph on an angle. Basically, each person is kind of different in their point of view and how they like to look at a photograph. But for an engineer, having taken digital images to do a geometric study, then the angle is actually set for you. You have no choice but to actually take your photograph on along the z-axis to actually find XY coordinates that are equal to the center line of the statue. But to explain how I arrived at that, I have to go back to 1986, where I was looking down the length of the statue of Ramses at Memphis. It's a limestone statue, and it's lying on its back, and there is an open-air museum where you stand on a mezzanine. You can look down the length of it. But one thing that I noticed was that the nostrils were the same. They were symmetrical, left and right. And that was unusual to me, and I'd kind of noted mentally, well, that's strange, because it's always been my understanding, and certainly I haven't seen anything that would argue against that understanding, is that nobody's nostrils are identical. If you look at your own nostrils in a mirror, you'll see that there is a difference between the right and the left. So that was noteworthy for me, and also the perfection, the apparent perfection with which it was crafted. But I wasn't there to actually study art. I was there to study the pyramids from an engineering perspective. And it wasn't until 2004 when I went to Luxor, because this was my first visit to Upper Egypt, and actually to visit the temples. I didn't have much interest before then. And walking through the Temple of Luxor, I was absolutely blown away by the sheer scope of the work that they had performed. I mean, these statues are massive. They're about 45 feet tall, and they're weighing about 600 tons. And then there was one particular feature that caught my eye that I was able to examine very closely, and that was the white crown of Upper Egypt, which is a conical-shaped crown with a knob on the top. It's almost like a bowling pin or something like that. And I was able to look at it and put my hand on it and feel the surface. And of course, my experience with machine products and perfect geometry that come off machining centers and lathes over the years, this particular piece seemed to have a geometric perfection that was. It didn't appear that it was handmade. It was just too perfect. But how perfect was it? I don't know, and I wouldn't know until about 2 years later, when I took some good camera equipment to Egypt. I actually signed up for a tour with John Anthony West, and went to Luxor and was able to examine these crowns again and took some photographs that where I could actually look at the symmetry from one side to the next. And so it developed from there. But from the crowns, I looked at the Ramses head, and then, of course, remembering my trip to Memphis many years earlier, I took photographs that were along the central axis or as close to the central axis of the Ramses head that I could take, so that I could actually determine if the right and the left side of the face were actually symmetrical. And as it turns out, just a slight movement off axis, and you would get some kind of mismatch. You could line up the jaw lines, and they are perfectly matched, but maybe the nose was off a little bit, or the lips were off a little bit, the eyes. And it was only after taking hundreds of photographs and going back there 2 more times did I finally arrive at a photograph where I could make a copy of the image. I could reverse it or flip it horizontally, make a transparency of it, and the jawline, the nose, the eyes would match perfectly on both sides.
And,
so
and
what
just
does that
for
mean?
the people, can I just interject a little clarity for the listeners? And so
Sure.
when you took these pictures, what you're saying is that they were front-facing, like right in front of your face,
Exactly.
not to the side, not looking up, not looking down, but just dead straight in front of you. Boom, there's the face.
Exactly. And essentially, the way you would present the information to a machinist if you were drafting it in a computer program and you were looking along an axis. We now create in the computers 3-dimensional models for machining similar kind of profiles, and we always work with Cartesian coordinates, X, Y, Z axes, and so the machine tool has to be guided along these in 3-dimensional space. It has to navigate precisely in 3-dimensional space, and so it uses X, Y, Z coordinates to do so. And the dimensions associated with each movement will actually determine the accuracy of the piece. So when you, to your point, taking those photographs just off axis, just a little bit, and you would see that there wasn't a perfect match from one side to the other because of the way the distance from, say, the nose to the jawline would. If you were tilted a little bit, then the nose would be moved to the left a little bit if you lined up the jawline, and then if you actually checked one side to the other on a mirror image, that would double the error. I know it seems a little complicated, but it's described, I think, very succinctly in my book. I may not be able to present it as accurately as I'd like to, just talking about it. But
I think I can give an example that the listeners could get. I think a lot of people have seen those applications where you take your picture and you import it into this other thing, and you can try on different clothes or put on different hairstyles. But if your face isn't perfectly straightforward, they always come out really awful. And that's kind of what you're talking about, is it needed to be just perfectly straight in order to be perfectly straight.
In order to, it's like if you could imagine a plane, a flat plane, or just like a steel plate down the center of your skull, then the right and left side of that, to that particular plane is equal on both sides of the face. Whether it's the center of the nose, so you have to be dead center to the nose, you have to be dead center to the lips, dead center to the eyes, and then dead center to the jawline. So all of those, the distribution of mass on both sides of that plane has to be equal on both sides. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me, and I'm going to make a little funny here, but I would make the assumption that there wasn't like a big line going down the middle of the sculpture saying here's the line of the sculpture to make it easy for you.
Right. And you've also seen where people would actually put a mirror up against their face or one side of their face and create a a mirror image of the face that is equal to the other side. And those are not necessarily perfectly accurate, precise, but it's the same concept. But what it takes to actually create such a condition and is fairly challenging. The whole point in me actually describing this information in my book is to actually put out a challenge and for better answers to how the ancient Egyptians actually cut their stone. Because the conventional theory is that they only had copper tools and stone chisels, wooden mallets, and with these tools, all of ancient Egypt was manufactured. And those tools are just not capable of doing this kind of work. Just not capable of it.
And we'll come back to that in a lot more detail as we kind of get a little more into the engineering. So once you got your pictures organized and got this perfectly centered image of Ramses' head, what did you find? Mm-hmm. What did you discover as far as, the product that they created?
Well, both sides were equal to each other. That they were using a geometric scheme. It appeared that they were actually everything that I was seeing was described in as circles. So you could and from the right side of the face to the left side of the face, you actually have a perfect radius on the jawline. Around the eyes, around the eyebrow, around the mouth, and all of these features had a certain proportion to them that seemed to tie into the Pythagorean triangle. In other words, if you base a grid on the 3-4-5 triangle, which is the Pythagorean triangle, and you use the mouth to establish that grid, all the other features seem to correspond to the grid. The radii that you see that actually outline the eyelids, the bottom eyelid, the top eyelid, they all seem to correspond to this Pythagorean grid. So. And equal on both sides, which to an engineer, manufacturing engineer, who looks at this, it seems almost impossible. I mean, we could do it today, but the question is, what tools did they have in ancient Egypt to accomplish this? And moreover, the tools that we need to actually analyze what they did thousands of years ago are highly sophisticated. So even if they had the fairly efficient cutting tools, you still have a lot of tools that are not in the archaeological record that would be necessary to maintain this kind of precision, because it's not just on one statue. There are over 100 Ramses statues in Egypt. And I've studied those at the Luxor, at the Karnak Museum, the one in the British Museum, and they all have this unbelievable precision about them. And even dimensioning from the center line to the jawline, we find that it is a precision that you would not be able to create as a sculptor. And I know this because I have talked to sculptors and I've presented this material to sculptors, and they don't even think in those terms, in terms of this kind of precision and this kind of geometry. So it is they are incredible pieces. And then back to your point, they speak more of engineering when you look at it in this way than they do of art.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue, Chris. Let's take a quick break. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're talking to Christopher Dunn about his new book, The Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. We'll be back with Christopher after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
Are you sensitive to energy? Want to explore the world beyond the five senses? Looking for a new career as an alternative healthcare practitioner? Then the Institute of Applied Energetics, Medical Intuition, and Energy Medicine training programs may be right for you. Our comprehensive curriculum provides students with a deep understanding of how to detect, evaluate, and transform the subtle body, as well as techniques for correcting energetic imbalances that may underscore a person's ability to experience radiant health. So if you are sensitive to energy, contact the Institute of Applied Energetics right away. Be a catalyst for changing the way healthcare is done around the world. Visit www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com and start your new career today. How would you like to live long and enjoy great health? How about creating solid bones and whiter teeth? Strengthen your heart and eyes, and have radiant, youthful-looking skin. There is an ancient health and longevity secret that has been used for millennia in Egypt, India, and China that can help you achieve this. For the first time in the modern world, Pearlsium brings this ancient wellness secret to you. For more information about Pearlsium, visit www.productsforthesoul.com. Before we get back to the show, I would like to thank all of you for tuning into Just Energy Radio. Many of the people I've helped over the years were listeners just like you. If you're at a junction in your life, don't stand alone at this important time. Call me or send me an email. We can set up a private consultation so that you too can experience health, healing, and wholeness in your life. To find out more about the services I offer, visit www.soulhealer.com.
Now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and we're here talking to Christopher Dunn about his new book, Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. To get more information about Christopher, his webpage is www.gizapower.com. Christopher, before the break, we were talking about the quality of workmanship in the statues that you found, especially, your investigation really focused on the Ramses statues. One
Correct.
of the things you talked about was the symmetry of details. And in your book, you actually showed, once you got your picture of that front-facing image, you put measurements in, saying, from the center of the nose going to the furthest edge of the cheek, it was this dimension, and I don't have the book open, and from, and then going to the other side, it was this dimension. And one of the things that you showed, which I thought was fascinating, was that the difference, and this was on the ones that were the most discrepant, was less than a 32nd of an inch difference.
Yes. That is on the statue at Luxor, and the statue at Luxor is incredibly precise. But there are, it's not like a precision gauge by any means. However, if you look at the statue in the British Museum and do the same kind of dimensioning, the perfection is much more apparent. There is no variation at all from the right side of the jaw to the left side of the jaw, from the center line going down the center of the nose. And the way I dimensioned this was that I took the photograph with a person standing next to it, and I estimated the size of the face compared to the size of the human face, and it was about 5 times the size of a human face. And so I increased the size in my CAD program to approximately that size, and then dimensioned it from there. So that's what is seen in my book, are those dimensions. That doesn't mean that those are the exact dimensions, but they are comparative dimensions from left to right if the statue was that size. And the Ramsey statue in the British Museum, I show it being, from the widest point is about 28 inches from the left side of the jaw to the right side of the jaw, near the ear, and then moving down towards the chin, the dimensions from left to right are identical all the way down. That is unbelievable. I mean, when you consider, Rita, that this is also a true radius. They are radiuses, and the radius is actually moving in three-dimensional space. So while we're looking at it on a 2D photograph, and for all intents and purposes, while we're looking at it, it may as well be 2D, but it's actually a three-dimensional object, and that radius is moving in the z-axis as well as the x and y.
And
it's an amazing
radius?
piece of work. I'm sorry?
And it's a smooth radius?
Oh, yeah.
I just imagine, I'm trying to make this smooth surface by hand. You got to put that piece in by hand.
Right.
And if I were doing it, it would be kind of bumpy. Might be polished smooth, but it wouldn't be wouldn't necessarily have that perfection of speed to it.
Well,
and in your finding, was it? Go ahead.
It was not as the surfaces are not polished by any means. That you would expect. I mean, if like in manufacturing, if you're working by hand, and your aim is to have dimensional precision, then you would be working parts in by hand a little bit at a time, and you'd be polishing and measuring and polishing and measuring to make sure that you are achieving your objective. But these statues do not have the appearance that they have actually been worked in that way. And in fact, one statue that is at Luxor has tool marks that flow from the top of the forehead down the side of the face into the neck. And also right above the eyebrow, this particular statue at Karnak, you see the indentations right above the eyebrow of the tools that were cutting it. But these striations are similar to what you would see if you're creating these profiles on a computer numerical control machine, or some kind of mechanical device or machine that drove and guided the tool across a predetermined path that ultimately would result in a very, very precise surface, which is what makes these statues so incredibly amazing, is that they have the geometry, they have the tool marks, they have the symmetry, and all three actually point to the use of machinery rather than handwork.
And the tool marks are all parallel? I'm just trying to, in my mind, go, okay, they're with their little, and yeah, I just am a little facetious here, with their little copper chisel, chip, 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 which I can't imagine how they would make nice, and you're saying that these lines are actually parallel to each other, not chip, 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 chip along the surface.
Yeah. And this is, of course, this is more information that I shared with the sculptor and to get their input, because it seemed to me that while these have the appearance of tool paths that you would find coming out of a machining center, I wanted to make sure that some sculptor wasn't going to come forward and say, oh, well, we make objects like that too all the time, and those are the same kind of marks that we create. And they said, no, when you're sculpting, you are working the stone from different angles, and you're moving your tool or your chisel or whatever tool you're using freely by hand, and essentially you come up with totally different marks than what you find on these statues.
Not parallel, I would assume.
No. I mean, even to do that, it would be almost impossible to do. Those are definitely mechanically guided tool marks. They're not freehand by any means.
I mean, it sounds almost like they use like a CNC machine to just put the big block there and just.
Yeah, and it sounds almost too remarkable to even consider that they would have that kind of machinery back then. But there is so much more evidence, a lot of other evidence that really proves without shadow of a doubt, at least for an engineering type like me, that they definitely had sophisticated machinery, and they had very, very large pieces of machinery that they crafted these stones with, and also, the pyramids in southern Egypt, northern Egypt. They definitely had machinery. There's no doubt about it.
I'm just going to throw out a kind of out there question. How wide are these tool marks? 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, smaller? The width of the tool mark?
Yeah, my estimate of the width of the tool mark is actually based on the tool mark on that is on the Ramses statue, because you have similar marks on the upper lip, the right lip of the Ramses statue, of the bust that is sitting by the obelisk at Luxor. And it's about 280 thousandths, just over 1/4 of an inch wide. So it appears that they were using some kind of a flat-pointed, or maybe it may be slightly radiused, but the tool actually was. I theorize that it was driven. It oscillated sonically or ultrasonically while it was being applied to the stone.
Let's talk about the stone here for a second. I think this would be an appropriate place to bring in this piece of conversation. There's a big difference between the hardness or density of limestone and some of the other things that they've carved out in Egypt, granite, dolomite, et cetera. Did you find that it was similar circumstances regardless of material?
Well, yeah. Not identical. You don't see the same kind of tool marks on the limestone statue at Memphis. Most of the other statues that you find in Egypt are made out of granite, and there is a difference in the hardness. Granite is much harder. It's an igneous rock, while limestone is a sedimentary rock. But the igneous rock is formed in the Earth's crust, and with tremendous pressure and heat, and that it actually squeezes through the Earth's crust and forms in these very, very large masses of limestone, diorite, basalt in some areas. But the granite itself is made up of feldspar and quartz crystal with some biotite or mica in it, and the hardness is about 7 on the Mohs scale. So the only thing harder than granite would be like a diamond or a garnet or something like that. But you can abrade it with quartz, which is the same hardness. But with anything less, you're not going to get very far. The conventional theory is that they were using copper and sand, quartz sand, to abrade the granite and remove the material. And there has been some studies done of the drilling experiments and also sawing experiments that using copper and sand. And these experimentalists have been able to show that, yes, indeed, you can remove a certain amount of material using copper and abrasive. And I actually did an experiment myself using the same method. But what I did is I had my first article on this subject appeared in Analog magazine in 1984, in August of 1984. It was entitled Advanced Machining in Ancient Egypt. And in that article, I focused on William Flinders Petrie's discoveries at Giza. He was the world's first English Egyptologist, and he remarked, his father was an engineer, he was a surveyor, and he was very observant, and he remarked on some of the tool marks and the proficiency of ancient Egyptian core drilling in granite. And he brought a core back to England, and it's actually housed in the Petrie Museum. But this core showed the grooves around it, a spiral groove that showed that the drill penetrated the granite at a rate of 100,000 per revolution of the drill, which is a phenomenal feed rate if you're drilling conventionally. So I propose a very far out controversial theory that they were doing ultrasonic drilling. And following that article, a gentleman by the name of Dennis Starks did some experiments where he was able to grind out a core using a copper tube and some quartz sand. And so that was published, and then the argument was, well, of course, Petrie must have been wrong about the spiral grooves because Stark's results only produced horizontal grooves. And so Petrie was brought into question because of my theory of ultrasonics, because the spiral groove was the defining feature on this particular core to indicate that they were using an unknown method, or a method that was more advanced than what Egyptologists were willing to accept. Because the tools did not exist in the archaeological record. And of course there's been a very strong backlash and argument against the New Age kind of theories or ideas about lost civilizations, and particularly Atlantis and lost advanced civilization. So my theory on ultrasonics was kind of lumped in with the rest of the Atlantis theories, and they were fighting tooth and nail to argue the theory away. But interestingly, what I did is I followed Stark's path, and I cut my own core out of granite. But I'd also followed up and gone to the Petrie Museum and examined the Petrie core, and also had them make a latex impression of this core so that I could examine it geometrically and determine and prove whether it was a spiral or not. I mean, I'd already satisfied myself that it was a spiral and not a horizontal groove, but I needed to show that it was a true spiral. And the only way to do that properly would be to actually section it and lay it flat and actually show some construction lines that would demonstrate that it was a true spiral. Well, I did that, and that's in my book. And I did the drilling experiment. But when you compare the results of grinding with quartz sand and copper with the ancient Egyptian drilling, there's absolutely no comparison at all. So the method is still kind of up in the air. I mean, I may be wrong on the ultrasonic part, and in fact, in my book, I say that I probably am incorrect on that, because the granite itself has the appearance of being burnished or had the application of heat in the drilling method. So it's still an open question in my view, but it's a question that's very intriguing. It's been a hotly contested argument over the last 20 years or so.
It just seems that if they were using copper tools and sand, that it would seem more sanded away and the walls would be burnished as opposed to leaving really any kind of tool marks other than little scratch patterns.
Well, that's it, Rita. I mean, that's essentially what I found was when, and it didn't even occur to me until I did the experiment myself, and that was that the finish on the core, the Petrie core in the museum in London, and the finish on the sanded core were entirely different, and essentially, they didn't match. And the other thing that is a problem with the conventional research is that they were experimenting to see if the methods that they proposed could actually cut into granite, but they left out some very critical information in their experiment. He left out what I would want to see, and that is a very, very accurate description of what he was trying to reproduce, and that would be, and the Petrie core is a perfect example, but there are other examples in Egypt, not just the Petrie core. That was not described, and also the results of the drilling experiment would have to be compared to the original in order to prove that the method was the true method. And neither of those steps were taken in this article in the journal.
And even if they could prove that they could create a round hole or a straight line using this technology, we're not talking about round holes or straight lines. We're talking about three-dimensional objects that are hundreds, thousands. I'm not sure even what kind of number to put. Now, exponentially more complicated than that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. When you go from just drilling a simple hole, you're talking about construction work. Somebody working on the roads or something like that with a hammer drill, and then examining the tool marks that their drills left, to actually crafting a very, very fine piece of art, or machining a die that would create the car body of a Porsche or something like that with the same kind of precision. So it's an entirely different class of work, but for the layperson walking through Egypt, it all appears to be the same. It's only when you start to kind of look under the hood, so to speak, and start to take measurements, that it opens up an entirely new perspective on the capabilities of the ancient Egyptians, or at least it deepens the mystery in a way, because I think the really alternate theorists or alternate authors and researchers have not really moved the ball very far in terms of convincing academia to re-examine what they teach in school and in universities. And so it was my hope and intention was to actually throw, I serve more as a bell ringer now. I'm not proposing any crazy theories. I'm just saying that the theories that have been proposed do not satisfy the evidence. And
I think that's one of the things your book really brings to the table is, here's the facts. Look at the precise tolerances here. Look at the engineering. It's like, I'm not, I didn't get the impression that you were trying to prove who made it, but just getting people to look at, here it is. Can you do this at home? kind of thing.
Well, yeah. Can you do it at all? With gather the whole department, your whole archaeology department, and engage the engineering department too, and because you're going to have to engage them at one point or another to be able to replicate what we see, and that they don't even think in those terms. So hopefully things will change, and I expect them to. I really do, because I think while the Giza power plant had a very radical theory that it seemed to have a knee-jerk reaction, or I think there was one academic who actually wrote about it, and he was an Egyptian English historian, William Rubenstein, and he said that he sounded like I was coming from fruitcake land, and so rather than putting anything in there that had the smell of fruitcake, I wanted to present something that was very scientific, very factual, with no real
woo-woo stuff.
Something that was hard to refute. Yeah, no fruitcake and no rum.
I don't know if you watched that series, Chasing Mummies. I talked about it on the show a couple of times, and
I did.
Dr. Hawass, as I say, our good buddy Dr. Hawass, termed all of the Atlantis, alternative Egypt people, he termed them pyramidians.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and
it's sad because material like yours, it's like, sorry, it's there.
Well, that's fine. I mean, I we can talk about chasing mummies. That's fine. I didn't write this book for Dr. Hawass or any other Egyptologists that are living, or maybe future Egyptologists. No, if an Egyptologist wants to pick it up and read it and communicate with me, I'd be more than happy to. But I wrote it for the layperson, and more than that, I wrote it for the Egyptian, because I dedicated the book to the Egyptian. And it's interesting. Just today, I received an email from a doctor in Egypt who had read the Giza power plant and was reading Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, and he is now he's a very successful gynecologist, actually, and he does lectures all over the world. But now he's on call. He's for talking about Egypt, and he draws on my work, on John Anthony West, Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval. He loves it. I mean, the Egyptian people really love this kind of research because it does not denigrate the ancient Egyptians. It actually glorifies them and raises them, and as far as their status in the world, in my opinion. They need, the ancient Egyptians need to be recognized for what they did.
And how they did it. And I think it is a
right.
huge mystery. And, I always joke around that, these people that are living in little huts that have their little copper tools are doing these magnificent, over-the-top things. It just doesn't, one does not equal the other at all.
No, it does not. It does not. And, but some people, I could get indignant about it, but I think that's just the way of the world. When we talk about the history of Egypt and how the Egyptians were viewed by early explorers and researchers, then I can understand the concepts or the ideas that were formed. I don't agree with it. So I think it's
all right, Chris, we need to go take another quick break, but let's come back to that topic on the other side. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're talking to Christopher Dunn from www.gizapower.com. We'll be back after these words from our sponsor.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
balance in all things is critical to maintaining health. In the hectic drive of today's world, many of us forget to take care of our most important asset, ourselves. At productsforthesoul.com, we want to support your effort to nurture yourself. We offer a wide variety of herbs, supplements, and high-quality, ready-to-eat, all-natural foods. We even offer holographic chip technology products that can augment the body's natural ability to increase energy, improve sleep, and mitigate pain. Best of all of our products are delivered straight to your door. It's time to start loving yourself. Visit productsforthesoul.com and let us help you along the way. Take a journey to the dark side of the spirit world and meet the bad kids on the block in Dark Angels, an insider's guide to ghosts, spirits, and attached entities. Who are these bad kids? As a child, you might have met one at night, under your bed, in your closet, or down a dark hallway. Dark Angels isn't a dull dissertation about ghosts. It's filled with revealing information about how these dark forces can influence our lives. Order your copy of Dark Angels today. Visit www.darkangelsbook.com for more information.
Move past the crossroads in your life and discover alternative solutions to your deepest concerns at soulhealer.com. So whether it's a physical problem, an emotional issue, a question about work, or troubles in your relationships, naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise can help you. Bring peace, harmony, and health back into your life. Schedule a session today. Visit soulhealer.com right away and live the life you've been dreaming of.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and we're here talking to Christopher Dunn about his new book, Lost Technology of Ancient Egypt. His webpage is www.gizapower.com. Christopher, I would say before the break, but in the earlier segment, we were talking quite in depth about the tools that the Egyptians used to create some of these monuments. And one of the things that your theory is that they used ultrasonic drilling. And I was wondering if you could explain what that process is, what ultrasonic drilling is.
Well, ultrasonic drilling is, they call it impact machining too, or sonic machining. And essentially it uses sound waves to oscillate a drill, which is obviously a physical drill, and then an abrasive to impact the material. They use it on semiconductor material, glass, very, very hard materials. It doesn't work on very good on soft materials, but it does on hard materials. It oscillates at about 20,000 hertz, and it is analogous, I would say, to a jackhammer, except it's obviously a lot faster. The jackhammer, pounds the material and oscillates up and down. That's the same thing, except much faster. The ultrasonic drilling of the Petri core is under question at the moment. There are some people who still believe that it could also liquefy the material at the same time. I'm not so sure about that, but experiments still need to be done to prove or dismiss that particular theory. I think there are other options. Some people have suggested maybe using a Brown's gas, and then there is another gentleman who has contacted me, and he's talking about the mythical Shamir drill of the Israelis. So there's a lot of different options. They all need to be tested. Nothing is proven. The only thing that is proven is that they were not using the simple copper tools and quartz sand to actually create these artifacts. That has definitely been disproven, in my opinion.
I'd like to kind of get your input on some parallels in like ancient Greece, the Renaissance, even contemporarily. Many artists use material like marble to sculpt. And so I was wondering, a material like granite versus something like marble, I'm not sure as far as like the hardness of the material, because obviously in the Renaissance and classical Greek art, I mean, they're flamboyant is a nice word to use, as far as the detail that they're manufactured with or they're done with. So is it as hard a material? Is it a much softer, easier material to work with?
Oh, marble is a lot softer than granite. And, one of the questions I asked Mike Leckie, who is a sculptor from Oregon, who I was in communication with and consulted with on the Ramses statue, that if he was to build one of these statues, even a small one, he would have to upgrade his tools in order to do it, because the tools that he uses to cut marble, wouldn't hold up cutting the granite. Granite really wasn't worked much by the Greeks or the Romans. I mean, their statues were mostly calcite, limestone, marble. But they didn't use the granite. So it's a brittle material, and it's a very difficult material to work. It's just a very stable material. I mean, we use it in manufacturing the surface plates, and when you have a very, very flat surface plate, it tends to be very stable. So it's very useful material for manufacturers. But when you talk about the Renaissance and the beautiful statuary that the Greeks and the Romans cut, and even the statuary that all nations have engaged in, they didn't work in granite until the invention of steel, or the discovery of iron and the smelting of steel chisels, and even then they used it very sparingly. And when you look at also the statues themselves, you don't find the same perfection and symmetry that you do on the ancient Egyptian statues. So the stone and the character of the statues are entirely different.
That was one of my other questions, if they had the same level of precision that you're finding in Egypt.
No, you don't see that, and you don't see the same kind of tool marks that you find on the ancient Egyptian statues. I mean, I can't say that I have studied every single statue from the Greeks and the Roman period, but just looking at some of them, like the statue of Constantine, the actual surfaces of the surface of the face, it has character. It has, that's a weathered face with lines and the signs of aging, and most faces are not symmetrical. But when you look at Ramses, here you have a perfectly geometric face, not only symmetrical on both sides, but the dimensionally and geometrically, there are a lot of correspondences with this particular statue and sacred geometry. You have the Fibonacci spiral that seems to have some correspondence to the features of the face. The golden triangle, the golden rectangle, when you, as an interplay with the features of Ramses, and also the flower of life. The petals of the flower of life. This is really interesting because I would have never thought of this kind of comparison, but my wife did. And as I was working,
that's because women are smart.
Women are very intuitive, and I was showing her. I said, Jean, look at the Ramses and the golden triangle and the golden rectangle, and how it seems to have these correspondences with the features of the face. And she says, well, have you tried the flower of life? And I said, why would I do that? I'm an engineer. She says, just try it. Okay. Yes, dear. And so I drafted a flower of life, and lo and behold, it's amazing. It's in my book. But the petals on the flower of life, they match the features of the face. And, I mean, it's almost like, was that intentional? What design scheme were the ancient Egyptians using? This was mind-blowing stuff. That they actually have this face, and you put a flower of life on it, and you have all these correspondences to the bottom lip, and the bottom lip, the outline of the bottom lip, and also the bottom eyelid. The petals match. And the flowers, the full flower, the center point of the full flower, you find fits right on the nose, and then right in the area where you would actually place the third eye. Now you tell me. I mean, I was very, very surprised to find that.
They just make it up. I watch a lot of the shows on TV, sometimes because they put out good information, other times because I get a good laugh at them. Yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, with their little sticks and ropes, and they were just pulling them massive blocks along, But we were watching one show. We were watching one show. I mean, this goes to the geometry point, and they were saying, well, the pyramids were made perfectly square because they had a point, and they made this giant radius circle in the sand, and then at that point they had like this little right angle thing, and they made four corners, and they were just really lucky, and it ended up square. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
I believe that they had in-depth knowledge of geometry. That's where Pythagoras saw all of it. Hello?
Yeah. I mean, he's alleged to have actually gone to Egypt and entered into their mystery schools and been taught geometry by the ancient Egyptian priests. So, but that's ancient history. It's he gets credit for it. I mean, it's named after him. It's not named after an Egyptian. Same with Fibonacci. Mm-hmm. So. But they were very, very advanced in their geometry. There is an excellent book about the Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe by Michael Schneider. I don't know if you know him or have read that book, but he's a mathematician, and he gives tremendous credit to the ancient Egyptians and their geometry, and they deserve it. We're still actually drawing from them and learning from the ancient Egyptians even today, except we've got better tools in order to do our analysis. So, the other piece of geometry that I was surprised to learn was the ellipse on the crowns. I mean, the white crown of Egypt, and finding that they were actual ellipsoids. No, the ancient Egyptians weren't supposed to know the ellipse, were they?
No, they just had a little piece of string with a little twig on the end.
Well, that is what amazes me, and I have actually really start talking to people who start going down that path, because I've entered into many discussions, and then as soon as somebody starts mentioning using a piece of string and a wooden stick, I'm out of there. I'm not even going. I mean, this person is not going to be educated at all. They're not going to learn anything, and because their mind is closed. And I got into a debate one time with somebody and if all of this work in Egypt could be produced with a toothpick and a grain of sand, it gets so ridiculous, the conventional view and the conventional theory, to engineers, to people who are actually doing this work for a living and have done this work for a living, and see something more to it, to get somebody who has absolutely no work-life experience, no education in the field, who think they know it all because they read something in college on it, and but it's just ridiculous.
They saw it on TV. It's got to be true.
Well, that's the other thing. The TV is, that's a double-edged sword. I mean, it can convey a lot of information, but it's never complete. In fact, there is a recent. You talked about chasing mummies. There was another recent show called Ancient Aliens, and I appeared on that. It actually aired last night. The episode that I was on last night. But the Ancient Aliens. Yeah, I know.
I have my little, TiVo thingy. It's supposed to record, and it didn't record it.
Oh, okay. Well, that was they did a great job. But the thing is that this is what I say, because they want me to say, oh yeah, Ancient Aliens did this. I don't believe that personally. I don't want to take from the Egyptians and give to another culture, another race, what they accomplished. I mean, that they have been, over the years, they've been stripped of many of their priceless artifacts, and they are very, very sensitive to having their cultural heritage taken away from them. But moreover, I haven't seen any evidence. I mean, Ramses doesn't look like an alien. Amenhotep III doesn't look like an alien. Akhenaten, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, kind of.
Maybe a little bit, but I mean, they're human. They're human, and I think eventually we will be able to duplicate a lot of what the ancient Egyptians have done, and we have developed our science and technology gradually over the years, and the ancient Egyptians had 3,000 years. But what is really puzzling to me, and this is what I bring out in my book, and I think it's a very important question, and that is the conventional theory about how the pyramids were built and how these statues were crafted, the temples were built. You go back to the beginning of Egyptian civilization, or if you go to the 4th dynasty where the pyramids were built, the conventional theory is that they were using copper tools, stone chisels, wooden mallets, and dragging stones on rollers, or along mud across the ground. But jump forward a couple of thousand years, and they were still using the same methods. And to the time of Ptolemy, their methods hadn't changed a bit according to conventional science. So that to me is just totally counterintuitive in terms of how civilizations develop. The genius and the incredible capabilities and accomplishments of the ancient Egyptians speak of genius. They speak of very, very, very bright engineers and scientists. And even to think that even a simple craftsman would not improve on his tools over a 2,000-year period is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're taught to believe, that the ancient Egyptians were still using the same tools they used 2,000 years ago. How does that sound?
Unfortunately, the only thing they have found are those few cases with the copper chisels and
exactly
whatever, and so that's the only thing they can say. Oh, okay, well, that's what they used.
They haven't found the machines.
The missing link.
Yeah, exactly. But the tool, the marks, and the geometry that would actually require a machine to replicate it or reproduce it, those are there. It's secondary evidence, and I think we have to recognize that they had to have had them. Not just they continue to drive home this ridiculous theory of copper chisels.
And I have a two-part question, and I think you might get where I'm going with this, maybe.
Okay.
Ramses built a lot of stuff. Based on your information, one, how many Ramses statues are there? And when you compare, at least the ones that you have compare them together, do you find the same kind of proportions in the face, in the headdress? They might be scaled differently, but are the features basically the same proportion, that kind of thing?
Yes, from what I've seen. Now, it's very, very difficult to get really precise with it, but there are over 100 Ramses statues, and the faces are all the same, regardless of how you look at them. Well, not regardless of how you look at them, because some of the heads are still on top of the bodies. Others are not. The one that I studied at Luxor is actually at ground level, and it's set on a base, and so it's the geometry of the face is different when you look at it from a different angle. When you're looking at Ramses straight on, you'll see that they actually crafted a visual compensation into the statue. The ancient Egyptians used what they call entasis, where it's a visual compensation to compensate for how you look at a structure. The Greeks were very good at this. They did that in the Parthenon. But the Ramses statue has some deformed, what you would consider unnatural features to the face when you look at it straight on. But it wasn't intended to be looked at ground level, at eye level. It was intended to be you look up at it as you enter the temple. You'd be looking up at the Ramses statue. But what happened, what they did was that they crafted the mouth so that it had an unnatural smile to it. It was an upturned mouth. And when you look at it straight on, it looks unnatural. But when you look at that same mouth from the ground, it appears more natural. Whereas if it appears natural when you're looking straight on it, and then that face was actually put on top of 45 feet in the air, then the mouth would appear as though it was downturned. That was one thing. The other thing was the eyes. And the eyes were crafted so that they appear like they're looking down. And so it's a really brilliant technique that they used in crafting the statue. So, but as far as capturing an image of every statue at the same angle in order to determine with precision the proportions of the face and how they compare to another statue, you would have to be, with those statues that are sitting high, you would have to be elevated in order to do that, and then you'd have to make sure that you'd have reference points that would assure you that you're exactly the same elevation taking each photograph or each image. The other
I understand that, but my question, I mean, because I would make the assumption that you have, with all of your background and experience, a pretty good eye. You know, you can look at it and go, no, that's not quite right.
Yeah, well, the two statues that I would point to, I mean, is the one at Luxor and the one in the British Museum. And both of them, if you overlay them with a 3-4-5 triangle, you would see that they had the same kind of geometric protocol that they were engaged with in order to design the face. In order to make Ramses look identical from statue to statue to statue, because they don't vary. It's like, if you got a sculptor who's going to make sculpt a particular person, and they come up with a statue, then somebody comes up after them and creates their own sculpture of that person. Those sculptors are not going to look the same. I mean, you might be able to identify the person and say, yeah, that's Joe, but there are differences between the statues. The precision and the geometry and the symmetry on all of these statues is very, very similar. The symmetry, particularly, is true from one statue to the other. The angle causes some variations in the geometry, but you're still talking about circular geometry lining up with the 3-4-5 triangle grid.
And see, that kind of, I was hoping you would go there, because it made me wonder. With 100, I mean, Ramses was around for a really long time, so he did have a lot of time to knock out statues of himself, but 100 is kind of a lot. And could it be that they came up, that these things were, quote-unquote, reproduced?
Well, the other thing is, I have, and I don't present this in my book, Rita, because it's not a fully formed theory, but I have actually questioned whether these statues are images of Ramses, because I took a profile image of the Ramses mummy in the Luxor Museum, and I compared the features to a profile image of the Ramses statue, and the proportions are totally different.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I really question whether Ramses actually had these made in his image. If he did, he's kind of pumped himself up a little bit, or whether he actually adopted the name that was on these statues. I think, it's my feeling is that in order to explain the disappearance of the machine tools, we have to go further back in time to allow them time to disintegrate. So we're going back maybe 10, 30,000 years. And in fact, there are schools of thought that believe that the ancient Cometians, which existed in Egypt around that time, went back 30,000 years. And if we go back further back in time, then we are looking at a lost civilization that had risen to a great height and had ultimately suffered a tremendous cataclysm. That is not a foreign concept to talk about cataclysms that have happened in the past. We know that they have happened in the past. And it's not a foreign concept to talk about future cataclysms because we discuss them and they're shown on the Discovery Channel. And we know what the effects are going to be if we suffer a meteor strike or, if there is a disaster or a cataclysm that affects our civilization. We disintegrate.
The music's going to come up here. The music's going to come up here in a second.
Okay.
When we come back, let's talk a little bit about what was being created, if you know, before and after Ramses, to see if we have the same kind of level of technology. Okay? Okay, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Christopher Dunn about his new book, The Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. We'll be back after these last words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
Go deep inside yourself and venture into the realm of the unconscious mind with my Meditating on the Kabbalah guided imagery audio CDs. Discover who you are and what you want in life. Meditating on the Kabbalah can help you to open, clear, and revitalize the energetic pathways of your subtle being. They will support you in your spiritual quest by helping you to access the profound insights and inner guidance you need as you work in alignment with your highest good. Let them help you to release negative thoughts and emotions and clear away any limitations that may be keeping you from experiencing your full potential. Walk down the path to health, healing, understanding, and enlightenment with Meditating on the Kabbalah. Order your copy today at www.soulhealer.com. That's right, that's www.soulhealer.com.
Hi, I'm James Altayanchik, the Black Knight of Talk Radio. Listen to Dr. Rita's Soul Healer Moment live each third Sunday night of the month on Feet to the Fire. www.feet2fire.com for more information.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rita Louise, the host of Just Energy Radio and the founder of the Institute of Applied Energetics. Start a new career today on the leading edge of alternative health and healing. The Institute of Applied Energetics can help you develop the specialized skills you need to work as an energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or professional medical intuitive. Besides our outstanding technical instruction, our programs also support you in creating and building a successful business in this rapidly growing field. Be a catalyst for changing the way healthcare is done around the world. Contact the Institute of Applied Energetics right away or visit appliedenergeticsinstitute.com.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. We are here talking to Christopher Dunn about his new book, Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt. His website is www.gizapower.com. Chris, before the break, we were talking about the Ramses statues and your thought that maybe there was technology, more advanced technology 30,000 years ago. And perhaps, and I'll just say perhaps, those statues might go back a lot further in time. And I'm just wondering if you have had the opportunity, because of your visits, to compare, and not necessarily on a technical level, the sculpture or the artwork like of Seti I, who would be just before Ramses, or one of Ramses' children, just to kind of put it in context of where they were artistically? And do you find, if you did that, did you find the same level of technical merit?
Yes, actually, I would say most of the statues. I can't say that I have studied Seti I.
I was just throwing out a name. So
yeah, the Amenhotep III and Akhenaten is another pharaoh. They have this extraordinary quality about the statues that indicate that the same technologies, the same guild, were actually creating them. And what I would say, well, I did mention 30,000 years. I've also written that from an engineer's perspective, when this was done is not really an issue or a question. It doesn't matter if it was done yesterday. In terms of the quality and the evidence cut into the stone, there is a minimum the minimum requirements that would be required to actually create these artifacts. That question does not change with time. The only reason I speculate going further back in time is to fix a place in history where a cataclysm would have wiped out the civilization that had these tools, and that doesn't seem to have occurred during the Egyptian civilization. So, and also, the pyramids. If we go back to the pyramids, there's a school of thought out there that they were adopted rather than actually built by Khufu, by Khafre, because what happened is the Khufu was supposedly responsible for the Great Pyramid, and then Khafre, his son, built the second pyramid, and then Menkaure, his son, built the third pyramid, but the quality of diminished after the Great Pyramid, because the Great Pyramid had the highest quality of tool work or stonework, and the design and the alignments, the casing stones, the precision with which it was built, the sophistication of the building was superior to the other two pyramids. And so that has actually spawned the theory that, well, if they were adopted, then Khufu, who came first, would have taken the large one, and then so on and so forth. But it's just questions looking for answers. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Lots of questions looking for answers.
Yeah, yes, and lots of theories too. But the facts are on the ground, and they're beautiful stonework that is engineered to look like artwork.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard on the Giza Plateau that there are tool marks in the dolerite, that there are stones that are just magnificently polished, that are made of the granite, or even the sarcophagus. Even today, it sounds like they can't figure out how they cut that inside chamber out of the inside mass, I guess, of the tomb.
The so-called King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid is built of granite, and it's a freestanding chamber. So it's a resonant body. It's actually free to vibrate. It's not tied into the core masonry. It's freestanding, and there's a lot of features about it that actually prove that it was designed and built for an acoustic purpose. It is generating an F-sharp chord between 2 and 9 hertz. That was detected by Tom Danley in 1995, who is an acoustic engineer, and he did some acoustic testing inside this chamber. But as far as the stonework, the inside walls are highly polished. The beams above the chamber are not so. I mean, they're more rough, but the walls are highly polished. The so-called sarcophagus, or the box, is very precise on the inside and polished. But there are saw marks on the outside and also drill marks on the inside. In Khafre's pyramid, there is a sarcophagus that in 1995, I inspected the inside surface with a surface gauge, and it was very, very precise, and surprisingly to me. So they were doing some very, very significant lapidary work in terms of working with granite and polishing it to a high order of precision. Going further afield, and we'll get back to Giza because you mentioned saw marks, and I would like to discuss that a little further. But and for the listener, if they want to go to my website and click on articles, there is a link on the article page called Machine Granite of Ancient Egypt, and they can scroll through and look at some of the granite work and some of the machine marks, but also some of the precision that you find on the stone. The Serapeum is a very, very enigmatic place. I mean, it's a total mystery. It's a series of tunnels cut into the bedrock near Saqqara, near the Step Pyramid. And the Serapeum has these giant granite boxes. There's one basalt box, but these granite boxes are like 13.5 feet long, 7 feet, 8 feet wide, about 8 feet tall. They weigh hollowed out of a solid piece, but the inside surfaces are flat within 0.5 thousandths of an inch, and polished, and also square. I mean, the technique for doing that, they had to have had some fairly sophisticated equipment. They were not, and then the question is, why would they see fit to finish the inside of one of these boxes to such a high order of precision? I mean, it has almost the same precision that we use in manufacturing for our granite surface plates. Now, when I in 2001, I attempted to get a quote to actually reproduce one of these boxes, and the company that I contacted were very, very familiar. You know, they actually produced granite surface plates to laboratory grade, precision surface plate, inspection grade, tool room grade, and also other products that you would find in a manufacturing tool room or an inspection metrology area, such as V-blocks, angle plates, and the like. And asked them how much it would cost me to have one of these boxes made. Well, I got a very nice letter back from the engineer, and he told me that they couldn't make one because they don't have the machinery to make such an object, but they would make one, and they could provide 5 pieces that would be bolted together to create a box. You know, they'd ship it to the site and bolt it together. The raw stone from the quarry would cost $175,000, and then the permits for the Department of Transportation would be in the thousands of dollars to transport it. So, you know, I mean, they were very, very significant pieces, but they're sitting there underground. Nobody pays much attention to them, but they're incredible artifacts. And there are photographs on my website of myself inside one of these boxes inspecting the inside surfaces.
Chris, you're making me laugh. I just am thinking of these Egyptians with their little sticks and ropes pulling these things that they won't even ship on a truck anywhere.
Yeah, I know, and you know, we've been kind of sold a bill of goods in terms of what we've been taught about their capabilities. You know, because they were doing things that the first Egyptologists or explorers into the area from the West were not capable of doing back at home. So, you know, because they hadn't even attempted to do such work, they didn't know what was involved in it. And usually, unless you've actually had a part in doing some of this kind of work, you don't appreciate what other people do. It's kind of like playing a musical instrument. You know, I mean, you're much more appreciative of somebody else's music that they're playing if you've actually learned how to play the instrument yourself.
Mm-hmm. Or a little bit earlier, you were talking about the flatness of the surfaces of those stones, of the inside of the tomb, and they're also trying to lead people to believe that, I'm going to make the assumption that these surfaces were hand-polished and there wasn't any pitting, I'm going to make the assumption that, you know, like the surface plates you're talking about are laid out and there's a machine that actually polishes them, you know, to a flatness so that it can be calibrated. but I don't think that it could be possible at all by hand.
They are machine flat, but the final finishing on a lot of these surfaces that are finished to an optical precision is actually by hand, and they use to calibrate a surface plate that has been in use for many years and may have become worn in particular areas. They will bring in somebody to lap it and to bring it back to its original precision, but they use a lapping plate to actually remove the high spots of the material. But they use an autocollimator, which is an optical instrument, to actually make sure that it is flat. So it's a combination of old world skill and modern metrology instruments that create some of these artifacts.
But these people were doing it with none of that quote unquote,
we
none of that technology.
Well, we assumed that, but I think
well, that's why I say quote unquote.
Yeah, quote unquote, tongue in cheek. No, they didn't have that stuff. Strings and a stick, and it's okay. I'm a hands-on guy. Somebody comes and says that, I say, well, prove it, and nobody's proved it yet. I think there was a program on television not too long, a few years back. It's called This Old Pyramid. I don't know if you saw that. It was with Mark Lenner. Roger Hopkins was the mason. But, I ended up at the end of the program thinking, well, if their intentions were to prove how the pyramids were not made, then this would be a great show, because it didn't prove. It showed how.
Is it the one where they made the block that was like 1 foot by 1 foot, and they had a hard time moving? I mean, it was just ridiculous.
There were several
show?
shows. There were several shows. There was the pyramid show, then there was 2 shows on the obelisk, which they started with a 9-ton obelisk. They ended up with a 25-ton obelisk, but it was enormously difficult for them, and then they ended up using modern equipment. But even the size of the obelisks were insignificant compared to the originals, because the original obelisks were like 500 tons, 400 tons. There's one still sitting in the quarry that's estimated to be about 1,200 tons. And so, it's like, theories are one thing, but actually getting out there and doing the work and proving the theory is something entirely. And I would propose a theory that used simple methods to do any of this stuff, because it wouldn't work. It doesn't work. And it's never been shown to work. And, you have to be able to replicate all the evidence, all the tool marks, or at least come up with similar tool marks. And you were talking about the Giza Plateau, and that is a basalt pavement to the east of the Great Pyramid that shows saw marks, and there's saw marks all over it. And then if you go to Abu Rawash, there is a stone at Abu Rawash that shows the tool marks that prove that this stone was cut with a saw that was 37 feet in diameter. So, you have all this evidence that shows a higher level of technology, and eventually we're going to have to come to the realization that the ancient Egyptians are a lot more advanced than what we give them credit for. But I don't think that realization is going to be proselytized in the West by any university body, but I think the Egyptians are waking up to the fact now, without chasing mummies. There are a lot of Egyptians.
We laughed pretty hard through a lot of that series.
Was that a great show or what?
I have to tell you, I think the most telling, I'll share this with you, the most telling part of that whole series was when they were trying to pull that stone that was part of Cleopatra's temple out of the water, and as they brought it up to the surface and tried to lift it out of the water onto the boat, it almost took the crane and the boat out. And it's and it was insignificant in weight. Insignificant.
Yeah, it was a. I tuned in. It was almost like a train wreck, you know. It was like, whoa, what's going to happen this time? I could only say that, you know, I have joked for many years now about the chambers above the king's chamber and them being called relieving chambers. And I have joked that don't tell me there are no bathrooms on the Giza Plateau. Just go into the Great Pyramid, and there's relieving chambers. And so,
okay, I'm trying not to laugh, but that was pretty funny.
and so poor Zoe, you know, the fellow.
Yeah. See, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and why they would choose to show
Zowie.
Paris
Come on,
on television. Zowie. Yeah. So he says that I'm going to punish you, and he says straighten my bucks, and she says no, and then he says okay, let's go to dinner. It's funny. Sorry.
We put a whole other storyline behind that. You'd like hanging out in our living room while that show was on. The commentary was just constant.
I imagine so.
One of the other things that you talk about in your book that we have, I'm just going to throw this out, about 5 minutes left, was some of the stuff that was in Dindar. They have been talking in the chat room about the carving of the light bulb, which we're really not going to talk about the light bulb image, even though that's a technology that they supposedly don't have. But I'd like to focus a little bit more on the carving in there because it is spectacular. One of the things that I noticed, I mean, let me just put out a little plug. This book is loaded with pictures. Excellent, excellent pictures. And one of the things that I noticed was that all of the carvings were raised relief as opposed to engraved relief, which I'm going to make the assumption is way harder than engraving into the stone.
Yeah. They call it bas relief, and as opposed to the sunken relief, which you find at Luxor on the granites, obelisks, and statues. They have more sunken relief. Dendera, I went there to actually study the crypt where this alleged light bulb is applied to the wall in raised relief, and I wrote about that in the Giza power plant and described it as a crux tube because William Crookes, who invented the crux tube, it was subsequently X-rays were discovered emanating from the crux tube, and that was the invention of the X-ray machine. But that was one part of it, but the rest of the crypt I was interested in because there are some very unique carvings in the Dendera temple, in those crypts. And when you get up into the temple proper, into the rooms, the carvings are very impressive. And it appears that, I did a study, and it appears that the carvings were applied to the stone before the temple was actually constructed. So they were carving these stones, they were applying the reliefs, and then they put the stones into place. And there are just little telltale clues that indicate how, that actually support that idea. Because the question had always been, there is these very, very narrow passageways that go to the roof of the Dendera temple, and they're very, very narrow, and you wonder, but they are loaded with reliefs on the walls as you're going up. The temple walls are also massive. I mean, they're very, very thick, 6 to 8 feet thick. It's a very impressive temple, very impressive temple. So, in my book, I describe some of the reliefs on the ceiling blocks, which indicate that they had to have been put together, carved before they were actually installed in the temple. But the most impressive part of the temple, to me, was the hypostyle hall. And I spent about 6 hours in that hypostyle hall, taking the same kind of photographs that I did of Ramses, square on, actually taking images so that I could study them from an engineering perspective rather than art. And the hyperstyle Hall columns are miracles in engineering. There are photographs in my book that you just referred to, and those photographs tell it all in terms of what the ancient Egyptians were doing, not only in machining stone, but also assembling it into these temples, because the alignments are perfect from one capital to the other. There's very, very little variation, and the contours are complex, but they are precise from one capital to the next. And when you consider that these capitals are hoisted up into the air and sit on top of these columns that are about 50, 60 feet high, then you're looking at quite a feat, because when you take a photograph from the ground and your object, or your object of study is 50 to 60 feet away from you, then the distance, any variation in how it's placed, X, Y, Z, the height of the column or each drum of the column has to be perfectly identical in order for this assembly to actually come together and be as precise as what is measured and what I display in the book. I'm really happy that you brought that up, because it's a very, very impressive temple. Very impressive.
One of the things, with all of the relief work that they've done is you don't see mistakes. Not big mistakes. I mean, I have a hard enough time, writing something and not having it, making spelling mistakes or whatever. Now, granted, somebody drew the little image on and they carved it, but even the quality, you show one picture of, I'm not sure which goddess, I don't recall, but one image right next to the other on the same piece of stone, and they look almost identical. There's very little variation. It's like, how do they even do that?
Yes, I know. And, one of the things that I did as I was studying these, and I had already so much information to share in this book that I couldn't possibly fill it with, put all the observations that I'd made. But one of the things that I did was on one of the figures that they just like you said, they look like they were identical. I had, in my CAD program, just copied one figure and duplicated it and compared it by making a transparency of it and dropping it on top of another one that was similar to it. And the features are just overlaid beautifully. It's almost like they were, they had a particular template or program that they used to actually create each figure. There are slight variations in them, but the perfection of the carving is really impressive. It's impressive.
Amazing. Chris, the music is going to come up here in just 1 second. Any last words you'd like to share with the listeners? Because I'm going to have you back on. We're going to talk about that power plant thing, because that microwave got me excited.
Yeah. Well, I would, the only thing that I say in my book is that before we have to be able to answer, we have to be able to ask the right questions in order to get to the truth. And if we're not asking the right questions, then the truth is going to evade us. And what I'm trying to do is actually try to ask the right questions and bring information that actually supports the question.
Chris, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was excellent.
Thank you very much, Rita. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay, and I will talk to you again soon. We will talk about pyramid next time. That was Christopher Dunn. His book, The Lost Technology of Ancient Egypt. His website is www.gizapower.com. Next week, it is the spookiest weekend of the year. It will be Halloween, so we're doing a ghosty kind of show, because you know how much I like ghosts. We're going to be having Heather Woodward coming on talking about psychics, witchcraft, and ghosts. And in the second hour, we're having Paul Eno talking about paranormal research. Are ghosts real? So until then, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. I hope you enjoyed the show. Until next week, be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser to www.justenergyradio.com for more show information and to contact Dr. Rita. Until next time, remember, it's all just energy.